Hi, and welcome to Strip Down with Marianne. I am Marianne. Thank you for joining me on this first episode of the podcast. I am so excited to have you here. Let me start by saying trigger warning. I talk about tough topics, and so I just want you to know that if I touch something with this podcast, my intention is never to harm, and so I just want you to know ahead of time that that could possibly happen. What is this? Why am I doing this? Who am I and why? So my name's Marianne. That's very convenient because this is Stripped Down with Marianne. And who am I? I'm a mom. I'm a grandma. I love Jesus a whole lot. I love yoga and running and exercise in general and anything outside and the beach. And I have a whole lot of trauma. And lots of people do, right? My specific traumas are childhood abuses, so childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse. So all of those, and human trafficking is going to be a topic that we talk about a lot too. And so this podcast is for people who identify like me or people who love people like me, right? And you're just trying to understand us better. This is a space where I want to strip down, right? I want to take down those walls and those pretenses, and I want to just share openly and honestly. I like to live my life in transparency. I found it works better for me that way. And with my history of all those abuses, secrets have been bad, right? Secrets have not been good in my life. And so for me, it is better to just live openly and honestly. And I encourage other people to do the same. And so this is a space where I'm going to talk about things that I have noticed. I'll invite other people who have survived similar traumas on to talk about things that they have noticed. And maybe talk to other people. I don't know. I like to learn from people from conversations. And so I'm hoping this is a space where you can also learn from the conversation and get something out of it. So that's what we do. That's why it's called Strip Down with Marianne. It's slightly separate from, my professional life where I do a lot of trainings and teachings, education and awareness about human trafficking. So I teach people how to identify human trafficking, how to work with survivors of human trafficking. That's what I do in my day job, right? I am the founder and president of an organization called My Name, My Voice. And so that's what I do under that platform. But this platform is going to be specifically for my sisters and brothers who understand a lot of what's going on in my head. And we're just going to talk about it. Okay, so that's where we're at. That's what this is. That's what we're doing. So let's start out. Today's topic, as you saw, is 6 degrees of human trafficking. So let me start before I get comments. I am not saying that there are levels of human trafficking. I am not saying for you to compare your story to someone else's story. Please don't hear any of that. This is a play on something that came up when I was a kid called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And the idea is that Kevin Bacon is such a versatile actor that he's been in so many things since childhood on up to adulthood. And I think he's my age, maybe a couple years older. And so that's old for those of you who don't know. And so the deal is that anybody in the world can be within 6 degrees, 6 people away from Kevin Bacon because he is so versatile. And so that's a fun game. Go play it by yourself. But I predict, my hypothesis is that all of us are 6 degrees from human trafficking. And that's not cool, right? That's not near as much fun as Kevin Bacon. But when we start to unfold what human trafficking is, and we're going to get to that in a second, I think you'll find that we have a lot in common, right? And that a lot of people don't really know what human trafficking is, and that a lot of people are kind of misidentifying what happened in their life, don't recognize it in their own life. I did not recognize it in my own life till years later. And so I want to help us recognize what it is so that we can talk about it and be honest about it and just have open, honest conversations and get that dialogue started. So that's what we're doing here. So let's talk about what is human trafficking. Human trafficking in its base form is the commercial, sexual, there's exchange, okay? There's an exchange, something of value for a person, okay? So it can be anything of value. That's the commercial part. Anything of value is exchanged for a sex act with a person, okay? Or a picture or something along those lines. So it can be money. That is the first thing people think about, right? You get paid to have sex with somebody. It could also be food. It could also be shelter. It could also be safety or protection. Okay, so anything of value. So start thinking in those terms, that it's the exchange of anything of value for a person's body. Okay, so I'm exchanging something for a person's body. That's the base. Now, when we're talking about, let me back up. If we're talking children, that's the end. That is human trafficking. We are done with that conversation, okay? When we're talking about grown-ups, when we're talking about 18 and over, okay, that age of majority legally, there, for it to be proven to be human trafficking, there must be force, fraud, or coercion. So let me break those down really briefly. Force, that's an obvious one. That's when somebody forces you, they grab you, they do chain you up, they do tie you up, they kidnap you. That is force, right? Force can also be through threats of force. I will hurt your family. I will hurt you. I will hurt your children, okay? That's another way of forcing, okay? Fraud is trickery, right? So, hey, you're so pretty. You should be a model. Let me take these pictures of you. And this is for modeling, right? And they start to push back those boundaries. That would be fraud, okay? Coercion, from what I have seen, is probably the most popular method. It's also the hardest to prove. And this is a simple, it's a emotional forcing, okay, to get somebody to do what you want them to do. So if you were a good mom, you would do XYZ to make money for your kids. If you loved me, you would do XYZ to help out the family. If you're down with this group cause, pick a whatever, you would. So that's coercion, okay? So that's what you need to prove human trafficking, force, fraud, coercion, which again, human trafficking is the exchange of anything of value for a human being, okay? So I talk about sex trafficking. There's also labor trafficking. I don't talk as much about that. I don't have as much experience with labor trafficking. So I talk about what I know, people. So we'll talk about sex trafficking on this podcast primarily. So now that we all know what human trafficking is, and we're starting to go, oh, so that movie Taken's a good movie, but that's not quite what it really looks like. 95% of trafficking, domestic sex trafficking in the US, is someone you know, family, friend, someone who took the time to get to know you, okay? So it's not that I kidnapped you and stole you away. It's much more subtle, which is why it's harder to notice. So let me back up to my own story to help you understand that. I would have told you that I picked bad boyfriends. I would have told you that I had a sucky life as a child, my family was abusive, and then I just picked bad dudes, right? That's what I would have told you. After a master's degree, I was sitting in a training, working in social services, and it was a human trafficking training, and I was able to tick off every single one of the little checklists, and I don't remember what it was at that time, but it was like, did your boyfriend ever this? Did your boyfriend ever that? Did anyone ever this? And I was checking them all off, and they're like, yeah, well, that's human trafficking. And I remember sitting in that training and just going cold, right? I didn't know what to do with that information. And so I started reading everything I could, trying to understand, trying to wrap my head around things that I would have told you were abusive relationships. I would have said that easily, but I didn't recognize how that abuse actually was human trafficking, okay? We didn't even have terminology like that back when I was going through it, because I was a good 10 years out of it before I was like, oh. So now, in hearing all that and hearing my story, this is what I'm hoping, is that people will start to connect, right, some of their own life and go, oh, so it's much closer than we think. Because when we start looking at that commercial exchange for anything of value, because lots of people say, well, I was never on the strip, right? I was never sold out of a club. I was never an escort. I never had a pimp, right? And so when people think in that terms of human trafficking, they don't always recognize it. But when you start to think, oh, but that landlord who made me sleep with him to pay the rent, well, that's survival sex, which is the sister of human trafficking, right? And some could be argued that even that landlord could be a trafficker. It wouldn't hold up legally, so don't say that. But there is argument there. But see how close we got? See how close we got very quickly? Or I was a sugar baby in college, right? Because that's how I paid for things that I couldn't afford. See how close we got? So that's what I want to start doing, is I want us to start recognizing that abuses that happen to us that might not be human trafficking are so close and similar to human trafficking that even if you weren't trafficked, boy, you were close. Boy, you were on the line, okay? So that's what human trafficking is. So here's my next thing. I think that all of us can get within 6 degrees of someone who was actually trafficked. So let's start thinking back. If I would have looked at my own life, right, as a child, I could probably say that there's a good chance that my mother probably was, but I didn't know her. Okay, so, but that's a good chance. Growing up, there are girls who I knew who now looking back, I could say, oh, yeah, that probably was right, because I saw their boyfriends and the control and how they had to make money to give to their boyfriends. And so I saw all of that. And when we're talking about human trafficking and we talk about childhood sexual abuse, when you add in that adulthood abuse pattern that comes into play with adult domestic violence and partner abuse, that triangle that we all know with the honeymoon and then the build up and then the crash and then the honeymoon and the build up and the crash, that's all parallel to human trafficking. And so when we start to look at the childhood sexual abuse and the childhood physical abuse and the pervasive childhood emotional abuse, you take those things, right? And you take adulthood, any of those things, and you put them all together, and what you have is someone who is so close to being trafficked that, traffickers smell it on them, right? That's how I like to say it, that they could smell the abuse on me and I was prime picking. And that's what they prey on, is they go in for whoever is vulnerable. And we're vulnerable because we've already been abused, right? And so we want to believe that someone's going to be better than the last one. And we want to believe that it's going to be different this time. And boy, can they put on a good act at first, right? And that's what trafficking really looks like. That it is someone who takes the time to get to know you, to slowly push your boundaries, right? All at the same time that they're pulling you away from anyone who might be safe in your life. That way, when you succumb, when you're like, yeah, okay, and it looks like you agree to walk away with this person, they've spent so much time and effort in it that no one even questions it. Now they might say, you picked a bad boyfriend, girlfriend. Oh, you picked a bad person. Your family might not like the person, but they'll put so much distance between you and your family emotionally. They're very good at it, that no one will be able to even talk sense into you. You won't be able to hear it. They will become the only voice you hear, okay? So now that we're pulling all these parts together with the childhood sexual abuse, right, and the physical abuse and the adult abuses, and all you're missing is the exchange. So if you grew up with all those other things, the only thing you're missing is that exchange part, the commercial part that makes it human trafficking, where someone else is benefiting from what happened to you. If you were a child who was sexually abused, did someone benefit from that? If your parent or your family member was benefiting, let's go back to paying the rent. Mama's got to pay the rent. Kid is the one making the payment. Okay, that's trafficking, right? That's what I'm talking about, not the movie Taken. That happens. It does happen, but it's so little when we talk about domestic sex trafficking, but that's what makes the headlines, right? The big splash, 10 women rescued from another country, right? That's the big splash, because that's what people want to hear. They want to hear it happen somewhere else. They want to hear we caught the bad guys, right? And everything can go back and those women got services. Well, here's what I know. There's not enough services, okay? So probably those women got a Band-Aid and sent back to whatever. There's not enough on the legislative side, so there's not enough laws to put people in jail for trafficking and make it stick. There's really not enough laws for the people who are buying the people. And so those headlines are meant to rile you up and then make you feel better and not ever touch the real cause. And the people doing the work, I've been working in the human trafficking field for the last decade. Anti-human trafficking field for the last decade. I worked in human trafficking for 17 years. But I worked in the anti-trafficking field for the last decade. And what I've seen by and by is that there's not enough services for the amount of victims and survivors that we see. And that's what it boils down to. And that's why I know, not just because it hit me personally, not just because it happened to me, I know that it's happening everywhere, in every demographic, in any situation. It's happening everywhere. And in order to get things like better laws, in order to get the public to care, right? I need them to feel it. It has to be personal. It's not personal to them yet. It's not personal to them. It's just personal to us. We have to get loud. We have to say, this is happening. It's not okay. And we have to change it. They're not going to fix it for us, right? They didn't. How'd we get out? Well, damn, we fought tooth and nail to get out, all of us. I don't care if you had 58,000 service providers helping you get out. You worked your ass off to get out. I meant to say I love Jesus and I also cuss. But you did. You worked your ass off to get out of that life. Even if everybody held your hand on the way out, you still had to do a lot of work, okay? They're not coming to change the laws for us. You know why? It doesn't mean enough to them. It means something to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to show how big of a force we are, how many of us there are. We are going to show them that this is an actual problem in the United States. That's where I am. I can only help where I am. In the United States. And we are going to get people to understand, first, this is happening, right? Second, we have to stop it by creating laws. And then we're going to hit demand, because I'm done. I'm just done, guys. So that's what this is about. Thank you for coming to this first episode. You're like, oh, holy crap. So here's what I want to do with this. 6 degrees of human trafficking. We've defined it. We've said that we recognize how close we can probably be to it, how close we've gotten to it in our personal lives. So now I want us to spread this. Let's just blast this all over social media with the hashtag 6 degrees of human trafficking. And if you are someone who is out there and you're willing to say it, please, if it's your first time, don't do it on social media. But if you're someone who's comfortable saying this happened to me, say ground zero. That's what I'm going to say, right? If you're somebody that you know that, oh, it happened to my friend, it happened to my sister, it happened to my whatever, okay? And please, here too, it happens to boys just as much as girls, but I'm a girl, so I speak from that perspective, okay? So I want you, if it did not happen to you, but you know that it happened in your 6 degrees, tell me what degree you are. 3 degrees, 2 degrees, right? Hashtag 6 degrees of human trafficking. I'm 2 degrees away. I'm 1 degree away, right? Whatever it is. And I'm going to say ground zero, 6 degrees of human trafficking. That is my that's my goal for this first episode, is that we take over the whole world, is that we raise awareness, that we get people to start talking about it, what it really is, and not just in the circles where we're in the anti-trafficking movement, this has to get out into the public. We have to get the public to care that it happened to us. Because if it happened to you, chances are it started when you were a kid. We're not talking about grown-ups where it started over 18. I'm not getting into those debates about people who choose that life. I'm not. Okay, I'm talking to the people who this stuff started without their consent or control, and we are going to put a stop to it. Okay, that's who I'm talking to. So thank you so much for joining this inaugural podcast episode. I appreciate it so much. If you want to hire me, you might not want to after this one, right? If you want to hire me to speak to your organization to do a human trafficking training or a trauma-related training, I am happy to. I do 1-hour trainings, I do full day things, I do ongoing consultation if you have a human trafficking program, anti-trafficking program that you either want to build or grow. You can hire me for ongoing consultation, and go to my website, which is mynamemyvoice.org, and you can learn more about what I do there for that piece. If you are wondering what my previous podcast it was a little different than this. We just interviewed people, and it was me and my friend Ryan. Please go back and check that out. It was called A Very Capable Hot Mess. It'll tell you a little bit about how we even ended up here, which maybe we'll get into maybe on one of the YouTube shorts about why I'm sitting in a room full of boxes right now. That's a whole nother story. Speaking of YouTube, you can go to YouTube. We are putting the podcast on all the regular podcast platforms plus YouTube, and the YouTube will also have some shorts where I explain some things briefly that we need to talk about, just to help people understand. If you relate to me, I want you to not feel alone in that. And if you love somebody who relates to me, I want you to be able to go, oh, that's why they do that. Okay, that makes sense. That's what that's for. Instagram will be updated daily. Appreciate you following so much on that. That's where I'm going to drop the 6 degrees of human trafficking. So please check that out. And then this podcast will drop every single Friday. Thank you so much for coming to this first episode. I appreciate you so much. Peace.